Okay, so now that the fronts are done, we're onto the rear. This is the International 4300, the 2001. We're doing rear brakes. First thing we got to do, I wanted to jack it up and then impact the lug nuts off, but they didn't budge at all. So now I got to use breaker bar. I don't have an actual breaker bar, so this is my torque wrench. I just set it to like 500 or 600 foot-pounds, which is a lot. I think this goes up to 700. And here's a trick for you. One of the things you can do is put your socket and your extension on. And obviously, if you don't have an extension, you can't reach that lug nut. So you have to have at least a minimum of 4 to 6 inch. But then you'd flush with the tire, and then you're rubbing, which is not fun. So I use my 12-inch. This might be a 12 or an 18. I think this is a 12. You want to put a jack stand right as close to the head as possible, but not too close. And then from there, you're just going to end up pushing down on this. Unfortunately, Dan will show that I have to stand on this guy. This is not coming off with the impact, and I don't care about your 1-inch air gun that your old Uncle Jimmy told you to use. You gotta use the breaker bar sometimes. So now once you do that, we're just gonna crack them all loose, and then we'll jack it all up, and then we'll use the 1-inch impact gun after that. So I'll just go on to the next one. I'm gonna lower this guy down like this, just like that, and we're just gonna continue on down the line. You're good. Man, after this after this part where I had all this breaker bars and pipes and everything, finally got all these lug nuts off, which was extremely difficult. But of course, this doesn't want to come apart because it's all rusty. So you give it a big old swing of a sledgehammer right there to the face, and this guy actually popped, and now there's a gap. So I can actually use a pry bar like right here, and I can get this guy to wiggle a little bit at a time, and I might be able to get this to separate. Okay, more beaten and heavy stuff over here. So, I told you basically on the front end of this thing, you probably would take 2.5 to 3 hours to do it, pull shafts or pull wheel bearings, do rear seals, do all that kind of stuff. You're probably gonna be more like 2 hours per corner on the rear because these are rusted on more. You got dually rims to take a lot more force to get apart. This is going to be all rusted together. Caliper's bigger. Bolts are harder to get to behind the leaf spring. So it's not as fun, but we have the wheels off. You can see how crusty and rusty this guy is. These pads are thicker for sure, but they're crumbling. The rotor's not too bad, but we're just going to probably do all 4 corners the right way with rotors and pads and everything from the get, just so we're all in good shape. It's kind of hard to see with the shadow, but I'm gonna try get this guy spread. I'll show you what that looks like. So I got the caliper bolts loose. So the top one was a 13/16. The bottom one was a 19 millimeter. The other side, it's 13/16 on top and an 18 millimeter. I don't know. That's all. I'm just telling you what I had. I'm not saying it's correct. I think somebody had a bad bolt and they replaced it at some point. But anyway, so I got those 2 loose. And then I've been trying to compress the piston like I was telling you. But I've basically been using this huge 5-foot pry bar. And those pistons are barely moving in and out. So my guess is this caliper is going to be no good. We're going to condemn that one and replace it. The rotor doesn't look too bad, but we're going to replace it anyway, like I said. So I'm going to drop that off. And then I'm actually going to pull the bolts. There's these little Torx, external Torx bolts here. Hopefully they're not trash, and I'm going to take this off and that off, and then there'll be clearance for this guy to come out, which I'll have to pull this axle shaft. I'll show you how to do that. We're going to do these nuts on the outside, pull the axle shaft, pull the lock, pull the nut, pull everything, pull the hub. It's a lot of work on these, but it's not too bad. Okay, so that bracket on the front, it was a 12 point, not an E-Torx, but a 12 point, 10 mil. You hammer it on real good, keep your impact straight, and it just comes right out. There's 4 bolts. And now we can pull this guy and drop it out, and then we're gonna be off to undoing this axle shaft. So I took all these nuts off on this axle, since we got that caliper out of the way now, right? They're 19, Wait, no, they're not. They're 24. My bad. 24 mil. You take all of them off. There's a bolt in here. Normally, they're all studs. It's probably a stud got lost or broken, and so they did a bolt. And then this just slides right off. It's an RTV seal. It looks like you got some peanut butter in there. That's a sign of moisture intrusion, which is not good, but we'll most likely end up draining that diff and changing it. So I will pull this guy out, and then we will take this guy out, and I'll show you how that works. So back on the rear here, now that we have the axle shaft out, there's a couple things to know. One, on these big heavy duty truck axles, you generally are going to have this big huge nut, and you will have, like where my flashlight's pointing over here, you will have these tabs. That's your locking tabs. So you have a outside nut, a middle locking tab ring, and then a inside nut. The inside nut sets the load on the bearing. The locking tab goes in the middle, and then the outside nut is torqued to like 350 foot-pounds or 300 foot-pounds or 250, depending on what your book says. But all it is it's really, really tight to sandwich those three together so that it puts pressure on the inside nut against the bearing so that it does not turn, it does not get looser, does not get tighter. So what I have is on this truck a 3.5 6-point big socket, and I have my breaker bar. It's technically my torque wrench. I set it to about 600 foot-pounds, and then I'm gonna loosen this in reverse. So the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna find the tab that's folded over. In this case, that tab right there is actually folded out of the way, but it was folded at a 90-degree angle holding the nut. I used a screwdriver and a hammer, and I flattened it out, and now I can spin this nut without interference. Normally I just put an impact. I put this on my half-inch drive or 1-inch drive impact and knock her loose, but it's a little late and I don't want to disturb the neighbors. You probably could tell that it's at night. We had a little snafu with the front brakes, so it took a little time to get back to this. So now I'm on the rear. I'm going to try to get this done tonight. So now that I have the tab out of the way, I'm going to loosen this and then lay it out and show you what we got. So now that I've got those nuts, the big stuff out front. So remember, I folded that tab flat. I took the outside nut off. I took the lock plate off, and I took the inside nut off, and then I took the outside bearing. So the outside bearing is gonna go on this end of the spindle. Inside bearings this side because it's inside towards center line, closest to center line. So once I did that, this thing's just flopping around, but the seal on this surface right here is extremely sticky. So what I have to do is actually use my pry bar behind the rotor against this bracket right here and do a lot of wiggling back and forth to get it to slide off and down the shaft. So right now it's actually just draining out any of that oil that's in there, and you can see it's all kind of milky. Not really great, but we'll clean that all up and we'll wipe everything out, inspect all the bearings. Bearings look okay so far, but next up is going to be clean it, flip it over, take the bearing out, the rear seal out, clean it all, put it back together, hammer a new seal on, and then also swap rotors, so impacting all those bolts and nuts out. So that's where we're at now. So we've got the hub inside. I used a pry bar and a hammer and drove the rear seal out. I'll actually show you on the next hub assembly how I did that, just in case you were wondering. I got everything hosed out and cleaned down. I cleaned that bearing. I pre-oiled it, just squirted some oil on it and spun it around, put it back in. And now I'm about to drive this new rear seal in. The part number for that is a 38780. This is for that rear hub assembly. Yeah, don't be like the idiot that did this last, who covered all of this with RTV before he put it in. Made a huge fucking mess for me to clean up. But these will seal plenty fine. You do not need to RTV them, so don't be that guy. Also, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but once I got it in, I took the rotor off first. I actually used my 1-inch gun with a couple adapters on a 13/16 socket to get those 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 bolts out. They're right there. I kind of cleaned up that stuff a little bit. I'm going to put the new rotor on after I do the seal. What I did is I took the rotor off, then took the seal out, so I had better angle. I think it may have been easier to drive the seal out with the rotor still on. And like I said, I'll show you on the next rotor how I got that out. But I'm going to use my seal driver kit. This is just a truck and seal driver kit that I've had for decades now. Little set here, and all you're going to do is find a seal. Probably that one's good enough. Might actually go to this one just so you have a little bit of extra coverage. Make sure you get it in square, and yeah, we'll just prop her right in there. So I got the bearing in. You always got to make sure you got the bearing in before you try to put the seal in. Got all those bolts in, impacted them on. So now I'm going to take this whole hub assembly, take it back outside. Back over at the truck here, I cleaned this tube down with some brake clean and wiped it. And the critical thing to look at is this sealing surface right here. This band, there's the leg right here. Your bearing slides to that. This is your rear seal, and it is perfect and clean. It has no grooves, no scratches, no nothing. So this is gonna be good. I'll put the hub assembly back on and go from there. One of the things I do is I shove the spindle back on, or shove the hub assembly back on the spindle. And I tried to shove it far enough back to get the to get the wheel seal on its wheel seal ledge, right? And that bearing should be hitting that lip right before the seal. Unfortunately, with the new seal, you have to press that seal onto that lip. So what I do is I get it shoved on as far as I can. I kind of hold it where, I actually got down on my knees, and I used my left knee and kind of held the hub up. And what you do there is you kind of raise the tail to make sure the bearing actually gets on and the lip of the seal is started. Then I cleaned that front bearing, put it in, put one of the nuts on, and then I used the nut, the socket, and the wrench to tighten that nut down. And as you're tightening it, I did like 50 ratchets, and this gap right here gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until all of a sudden this doesn't move anymore, and this actually feels like it's hard and it's going to click because it's a torque wrench. So what you do is you tighten it down a bunch, spin the hub like this. You spin it, and then you tighten it some more and you spin it and you tighten it some more until you're tightening. Your nut ends up basically like right here. I'm pulling on it, it's not going anywhere. So you're too tight. You give it a couple spins, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna loosen the nut all the way to where it's too loose, and then you're gonna tighten it down by hand, go a hair past that. So actually I'll try to show you one-handed. I'm going to click this in reverse. I'm going to put some force on this guy to break it loose. And there you go. So now this guy is actually loose. I'll put this right here. I will pull this guy off, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So now this nut is actually hand tight, right? And I'm actually gonna pull this bearing back out all the way real quick, and just put some more oil on it, just pre-oil it. And I'm actually going to squirt some oil inside the center of the hub assembly. So some of the newer hubs, you have to remember that when you're doing hub bearings, you don't want to drive this truck with no oil in the hubs. But how do you get oil in the hubs? That's a great question, because there's no fill port on this and there's no drain port. So the only way to fill this is you squirt a bunch of oil in the center, not in here, because this will go back to the differential housing back there. But you're gonna pull this bearing out, and you're gonna squirt a bunch of oil in there till it wants to run out, and then you put the bearing back in and you spin it around a lot, and you fill the differential almost too high, put the plug in, and then you take a floor jack on the other side of the truck and you lift it until the truck is leaning really far, and oil will start to run down the axle tube and into here, come through here, drop into here, and then run into this hub, and this will be full of oil. Now it'll oil itself over time with all that sloshing, but a lot of wheel bearings go bad because oil gets sloshed into here, but then it gets stuck in here and all the crappy burnt hot oil gets stuck in this cavity and there's no way out. So engineers didn't really think that one out. On the newer trucks, you do actually get drain plugs and fill plugs, but in this case we don't, so you have to be very mindful of that. So just as a precaution, I'm going to pull this bearing back out. Now that I know that that rear bearing's set and that rear seal is set, because this gap is so small, it's as far back as it can go, and I'm going to lube that and then go from there. Okay, so I got that oil. I pulled that bearing out, re-oiled it, put it on. I squirted a bunch of oil in the center cavity as much as I could reach. And what I ended up doing was I put that wheel bearing in, put the nut on, and I torqued it till it was snug and spun this a bunch of times and then turned it a couple, 16th of an inch, 16th of a turn more, 16th of a turn more, till I was just snug, but I was just a hair past snug, but this thing rolls smoothly, rolls nice, quiet. And one of the things that I wanted to point out was on this locking ring, right, you have this L shape, right? That goes on your back nut. This center tine goes on that center line, right? Goes right there. And what you're going to do is you're going to put this guy on, but I need you to notice that I'm going to show you, if you put this guy on there, and it lines up with that center tine, it has to go over the nut easily, smoothly and easily, and bottom out. So it has to be flush to flush, no interference. And if it does have interference, you need to take the nut and you need to just clock it a couple degrees more to where it fits snug. If you just went to the wheel bearing snug or just past snug, you got to remember, you got to do the whole loading. You do like 100, 150 foot-pounds to make sure that this is all the way snugged up. And then you back it all the way out, and then you go back into where it stops with your hand, and then you can grab it and just kind of turn it just a couple degrees more, spin it, and keep turning while you're spinning, and you'll get a couple more degrees out of it, and that's all you need. And if anything, you could put the breaker bar on it and go just a degree more to get that lock plate on. That's all you need. So now that that's on, I also want to point out that these teeth, you're going to have to take a screwdriver in behind it and pry it forward like this as a fulcrum right here, like this, to bend the tab back against that nut once it's torqued. So let's go get that one on, and I'll show you what that looks like. We're going to take this guy. I'm going to clean it off real quick. If I had a, tripod or a friend or something right now, I would show you the things like brake cleaning these parts off and all the dumb stuff that really doesn't matter, but maybe you might find it interesting. So we're going to get this on. Let's see how many mechanics it takes to put a nut on. There you go. So I always spin it backwards. I know people are like, oh, it's lefty loose right there. Okay. I go backwards until it clicks, and that means the threads are lined up. Then you go in and turn it. So now I'm going to turn this all the way back in. I'm going to grab my socket again, and I'm going to turn this to where it's snug. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the torque wrench to probably 300 foot-pounds and torque it down. And all that is a jam nut, and then we will fold the tab over. So one second. Okay, so I got the torque wrench on. I'm set to about 300. I'm going to push on this till it clicks. Okay, this guy spin. Make sure he spins freely, and he does. And this side's done. So now what we'll do is we'll get the axle shaft done. I got to come by with a razor blade or a wire wheel and clean off some of this RTV. We'll get it sprayed down and dried. I'll put the axle shaft back in with some glue. Torque all those nuts down. Those are just going to be like, let's say 85 to 100 foot-pounds, maybe even only 85. Then we will clean the rotor off, put the bracket on, put the caliper on, and then this side's going to be done. Before I get too ahead of myself, I need to point out that I need to fold that tab over, that locking ring. So you have a lot of options of locking rings or locking tabs, right? Because there's a bunch of them, right? Some of them, like the one on the left there, looks really grimy and ugly. The other ones don't line up, or, you know, so that one is perfect. What I'll do is I'll bend that one over, and I know that sounds kind of funny, but I'm going to bend that one over until it is flat, and I'll actually show you what I do. I'm going to use a pry bar because all the leverage makes this so much easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get under there nice and flat like this, and then I'm just going to pull down, kind of pull down and out. See if I can't do this while filming. This actually might be a little too big to fit in there, but I know I could do it because I do this all the time. It's just now there's people watching me. And if I get it folded, if the tab is folded backwards too far, sometimes it won't hook on the pry bar correctly. So actually, let's try this guy back here, this one. No, hold on. Okay, it took a lot of finagling, but I got this tab right here flattened out. You can kind of see it's flat up against the nut now, and that'll lock it. So she's torqued, she's locked. Clean some little pine needles and stuff out. And next up, like I said, clean the RTV off, spray it with brake clean, dry it off, shove an axle shaft in, and I will have to clean the inside face of the axle shaft also to make sure that it does not have any debris on it, like old RTV. So let's keep going. So I got the axle shaft cleaned up. I wire wheeled it and brake cleaned it, let it dry. You can see how dry and crispy this is. So that's all cleaned, and that's clean. And I put a little bit of gray RTV, which is an oil resistant RTV. You only need a little bit, a thin layer. I mean, this was so gooped up. I was pulling like blocks of RTV off this thing. It was nasty. So just a little bit. I'm going to put this together, put the nuts and bolt in, and then snug it up and let it sit for, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 minutes, move on this stuff, and then come back and retorque it to like 85 pounds because we want to let this cure just a little bit and get kind of rubbery, and then you cinch it down. So that's it. So I'm going to shove this in. Got these tight. Remember, this was a 24 millimeter socket. These are all snugged up. There's only a little bit of splooge, which is a good sign. I'll let that dry up. I've got the new pads on, the new pad slides, and I want to point out a couple things. One, I wanted to lube juice up this. Look at that. You're off by just that much. So if I lifted the truck up, no, actually that wouldn't work because this is bolted all together. So you can't take these slide pins out unless you go through a bunch of work taking this whole knuckle off the axle, which is not worth it. So what I did is I pulled it out, buffed it down as much as I could, coated it with anti-seize, both the top and bottom. So that's ready to go. At this point, I can put the caliper on. Wanted to point out that the rear pads we're using on this guy were a PFH 078610, although because it is the same 2222 caliper as the fronts, and they're all 73 mils, there's really no reason I couldn't use the same pads I used up front, which are actually factory thicker. The only difference between the rear pads, the 63 mil pads and the 73 mil, or 60 mil and 73, was that these are, I'm guessing, 60 mil pads, or for the 60 mil pistons. So these pads are a little thinner than the other ones. So we could use the thicker ones, but whatever. So we're going to mount the caliper, and then this is done other than putting the, so we'll put the caliper on, put this cross brace on. And yeah, this is going to be done other than putting the wheel on. And then it's just one more axle. Okay, got the rotor stuffs together. The caliper is on. I got these slide pins lubed and bolted together, tightened up. I got this bracket on. This was a 10 mil 12 point socket. I got these on with my 1/2 inch impact, which is up there. And, you know, I just did a handful of ugga-duggas, just a couple. they're not like a critical part. You don't obviously want them to be hand tight, but if you used a 3/8 ratchet and a long handle, you just want to get it tight and then maybe a quarter turn pass. That'll be probably plenty tight. When you're running the same 73 mil caliper with the 60 mil pads, which the only difference, if you line them up, they mount exactly the same. The only difference is the thickness of the pad, which means once you get this bled, you're going to have to pump the pedal a good handful of times to push that piston out to take up the slack, because you can see like there's a lot of slack in here. But these calipers will wiggle around and center themselves, and the piston will extend, and then there you go, it'll work. So it won't cause any problem. You just have thinner pads that won't last as long, but it's okay. So if we had more time and I could go reorder all the parts, I'd actually return these and get the 73 mil pads, but we're not going to worry about it for now. So lines on, this is open. We're going to gravity bleed it. Just give it a while and eventually it'll start dripping fluid out. That means this cavity is filled with brake fluid, and then it'll spill over. That means 99% of the space in here is full of fluid, not air. And then you can pump and crack open to release the last bit of air pressure or air bubbles and stuff like that for bleeding. This is all torqued down. This is all sprayed off and cleaned. So we're pretty much just going to gravity bleed this, pump up the brakes, put the wheels on, and then this corner's done. And all I have left is the other corner, which will just be a mirror image of this. So I think I told you about the wheel seal earlier, that part number, the pads part number, the caliper part number, and then don't forget that the rear rotors, their part number is FLT 1700150S1. That we have 2 of those, obviously 1 for each side. So that's what we got. So it's the next day. We got the daylight now, which is great. So I'm on to the last wheel out of 4. In a different video, potentially, I got the fronts done. Last night we got that done. Now we're doing this one. Remember, it's 10 mil, 12 point for these 4 bracket bolts. I got the caliper off already. That went back for a core. Then we've got your 24 millimeter studs. That comes out. And then we're going to take the lock nut and the axle nut out. I want to point out, I don't know if you can see it, but this is cracked all the way through. Some of these are really, really bad. They're actually cracked all the way through. So definitely in need of brakes on this guy. So we got the nut, lock nut, and outside nut lock ring and the inside nut off. Pulled the front wheel bearing out. Use the pry bar, wiggle that thing forward to pop it off the seal. Now it's over here. I wanted to show you how to get that seal out real easy. Pretty much all I did is I take a long pry bar through the front and I push this bearing at an angle or rotate it kind of like that. And I get this pry bar right under. It's kind of hard to do one-handed, as a lot of things. I'll show you. I've got that pry bar into that seal and it's over here and I'm holding it up, right? So you're gonna come through, move the bearing out of the way, and then you're gonna hit it with a hammer and it should pop right out. Just like that, there's your seal, there's your bearing. Now we can move that out of the way. We'll clean that, clean this out. And now I'm ready to just flip this guy up just like so. And then I'm gonna impact out all those bolts. So I got the new rotor bolted on. I put everything together. Everything's on. I got that inside bearing pre-lubed. First nut cinched all the way down really tight, like 100 foot-pounds. Spin it a couple times, loosen it up, tighten it down maybe, to where it's just past hand tight. So that'd be, like a, 20, 30 foot-pounds maybe. And then I got the outside, I got the lock ring on. I got the lock nut. I got this tab bent over so it's touching. It's holding that nut in. That nut's torqued to 300 foot-pounds. And I cleaned the surface, and now I'm going to put some RTV on this guy. Also, what I did this time was I pulled the shaft out to where it was like 2 feet out. did all my wire wheeling, my cleaning, my brake clean, all that before I put it over here. So now it's already clean. I could put some RTV on that surface and get this slid together and tighten it, and then put the rotor on. Oh, I'm sorry, the caliper and pads. So the caliper's on now, and the line's on. It's been gravity bled, everything's torqued down. And so at this point, we're pretty much ready to just clean up this big old mess and put wheels on. And then we'll do a pump and bleed after that. So I would say that this, if you lined up all of these rear axles, like two trucks next to each other, and you did one wheel, then the next one, and then another wheel, and then another wheel, right? It might take you, with unloading tools and getting everything figured out, it might take you 2.5 hours to get through one, and it might take you 2 hours to get to the next one, and an hour and 45 for the third one, and an hour and a half for the fourth one, just because you get a rhythm, you get your tools figured out, you get all your stuff laid out in a nice line, you know where everything is, you just move everything over from wheel to wheel, and it becomes relatively simple. So don't be scared of this job, but there are things you got to be mindful of, especially things like the wheel bearing torques and spinning it and pre-lubing things and keeping everything clean and straight. And yeah, that's all there is. One of the last things I recommend doing is firing up the truck, and with basically the brake assist working, the Hydro Boost on this truck, pump the brakes until you can hear it bypassing, and it's stressing the brake system, right? The reason being is you want to activate and close all those calipers and all those wheels and let go of the brake pedal, and you want to go around. So I did that. I started this up, pumped it like 10 times with it running, held the brake down for 60 seconds or something, and I looked at all of these brake line fittings. You want to look at, make sure none of these bleeders are wet, none of these fittings are wet. And then also I let go of the brake, and then I came back and I can still spin the tire. That means the caliper is closing, it's grabbing, but when you take your foot off the brake, it releases. If I came back and any of these were still stuck after I had turned it off, that would mean a caliper is dragging and I got to go back and do my work again. So everything looks great. Everything's dry, no leaks anywhere, and it looks like we are good for putting wheels on and sending it down the road.